The night my father had security drag me away from my own yacht, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled, took out my phone, and typed 6 words that would sink his entire empire before midnight. My name is Meredith Calloway, and this is the night I stopped being invisible. Let me back up. I was 26 when my mother died. 6 months later, my father, Harold Calloway, sat across from me at the same mahogany table where she used to serve Sunday dinner, and told me the trust fund she'd left me was being restructured. Restructured for what? I asked. Preston needs capital, he said, not even looking up from his newspaper. He's launching a firm. You'll understand when you're older, Meredith. Men build. Women manage what's left over. I was 26 years old, and my father just told me my inheritance belonged to my brother because I was born the wrong gender. I didn't fight him. I didn't have the leverage yet. So I did something he never expected. I disappeared into an industry he thought was beneath our family name. Marine salvage engineering. 12-hour days pulling sunken cargo ships off the ocean floor, learning hydraulics, ballast systems, maritime law, everything a Calloway daughter was never supposed to touch. 5 years later, I owned my own company. And 18 months ago, I commissioned the build of a $4.1 million custom motor yacht. I named her the Meridian Grace, after my mother. I never told my father I owned her. 3 months ago, my brother Preston called me, practically begging. Mare, I need a favor. Isabella's family, they're old money, serious old money. Her father's about to wire $15 million into my firm, but he wants to see a certain lifestyle first. I need to borrow the yacht for the engagement party. I should have said no. But he's my brother, and some stupid part of me still wanted him to see me as someone worth having in his corner. So I let him use it, under one condition. He signed a conditional bareboat agreement. In writing. Full legal usage terms, insurance liability, a revocation clause if the terms were violated. My captain, Daniel Reyes, kept the original. Preston signed it without even reading it. That should have told me everything. What I didn't know, what I found out only 3 days before the party, was that Preston had told Isabella and her entire family that our father had bought him the yacht as an engagement gift. My father, who has never owned so much as a rowboat. I found out because Aunt Nora, my mother's sister, called me in a panic. She still held the original court-certified deed transfer from when my mother left me her half of the marina property, the same documents Harold thought had been quietly buried in probate 7 years ago. Meredith, she said, your father is telling people at the yacht club that Preston owns a superyacht. People are asking questions. You need to see this before Saturday. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't need to. I just watched and I waited, and I let them build a lie so big it could only collapse spectacularly. Saturday night came. The engagement party. Miami's private marina, string lights strung across the docks, a jazz quartet playing near the gangway, 70 guests in black tie, including Isabella's father, a private equity billionaire named Charles Kensington, the exact man Preston needed $15 million from. I arrived at 6:05 p.m. I wore navy, not because I wanted to blend in, but because I wanted to look exactly like what I was, the owner, not the guest. Security stopped me at the gate. Miss, this event is invitation only. I'm on the vessel's registration, I said calmly. I'm the owner. The guard laughed, actually laughed, and radioed inside. A minute later, my father walked down the gangway himself, flanked by 2 men in suits I didn't recognize. He looked at me like I was a stain on his shoe. Meredith. What are you doing here? I own the boat, Dad. He leaned in close enough that only I could hear him. You service boats, sweetheart. You don't own them. Charles Kensington is on that deck right now deciding whether our family is worth $15 million. Do not embarrass us. Behind him, on the upper deck, Preston raised a champagne glass toward the skyline, laughing with Isabella's father like they were already family. He spotted me at the gate and didn't even flinch. He just smirked and mouthed one word down at me. Crew. I stood there at the gate for exactly 4 minutes while my father's security team blocked me from stepping onto the deck of the vessel I had paid for, built, and registered under my own name. Then I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and opened a text thread with Captain Daniel Reyes, who was standing at the helm 3 decks above the party currently celebrating on my mother's namesake. I typed 6 words. Initiate Protocol 0. Return immediately. My finger hovered over send for exactly 2 seconds. Because once I pressed it, there was no undoing what was about to happen to my family, out there, in open water, with nowhere left to run. I pressed send. The text went through at 6:41 p.m. I know the exact time because I stood at that gate and watched the little delivered mark appear under my message, and then I counted the seconds like they were the only thing keeping me standing. 10 miles out, Captain Daniel Reyes was standing at the helm of the Meridian Grace in his dress whites, having been briefed on Protocol 0 the same week I signed the build contract 18 months ago. Protocol 0 wasn't some dramatic term I made up for effect. It's real maritime procedure, a formal owner-authorized revocation of use, executed the moment a vessel clears 3 nautical miles into international waters. Once triggered, the captain is legally and contractually bound to shut down non-essential systems, notify all persons aboard of an emergency return, and pilot the vessel back to port under distress protocol. No negotiation. No override. Not even from the person who'd been introducing himself as the owner all night. I didn't see what happened on deck. But Daniel told me every detail 3 hours later, and I've replayed it in my head so many times I feel like I was standing right there. The jazz quartet was mid-song when the deck lighting cut from warm gold to hard white emergency floods. The sound system died mid-track. Preston, glass raised, was in the middle of telling Charles Kensington a story about his boat, when the engines groaned beneath their feet, and the entire vessel began a slow, deliberate turn back toward Miami. "What is this?" Charles asked, according to Daniel. "Some kind of theater. A surprise for the happy couple." Preston laughed it off. "Captain's probably just checking the weather. Sit tight." But Daniel didn't come explain it himself. He sent his first mate down with a printed notice, because Protocol 0 requires physical documentation to be presented to anyone claiming ownership or authority over the vessel, per the liability terms I'd insisted on when I signed with my insurance underwriter. The first mate handed it directly to Preston in front of Isabella, her parents, and 68 other guests. The notice read, Vessel M/Y Meridian Grace, registered sole owner, Meredith A. Calloway. Authorization for guest use revoked as of 6:41 p.m. Eastern Standard Time per Conditional Bareboat Agreement, Section 4.2. Vessel returning to point of origin under owner directive. Preston's face, Daniel said, went the color of the tablecloths. "This is a mistake," Preston said, loud enough for the deck to hear. "This is my father's boat." Isabella took the paper from his hands. I imagine her reading it twice, because that's what I would have done. Then she looked up, not at Preston, but at her own father. "Dad," she said, "why does this say Meredith owns it?" I wasn't there for that part. But I was standing at the marina gate 40 minutes later when the Meridian Grace came into view on the horizon, lights blazing, engines cutting through the dark water faster than a leisure return ever should. My father was still beside me at the gate. He hadn't left. I think some part of him assumed I'd storm off crying, and this would be forgotten by morning. Instead, I stood there in my navy dress, arms crossed, watching my own yacht come home early with his golden sun trapped on it. "What did you do, Meredith?" he asked, his voice low. "I didn't do anything, Dad. I own a boat. The boat came home. Preston texted me. He says something's wrong with the systems. Some kind of malfunction." "There's no malfunction." I finally turned to look at him. "There's an owner. And for the first time tonight, everyone on that boat is about to find out who she is." The yacht docked at 7:52 p.m. I watched Daniel step off first, folder in hand, and walked directly past my father toward a stunned Charles Kensington, who was helping his visibly shaken daughter down the gangway. "Sir," Daniel said, handing him the folder, "I believe you should see this before you leave tonight." Inside was everything. The federal vessel documentation certificate, listing me as 100% titled owner. The original conditional bareboat agreement, signed by Preston himself, including Section 6, the clause he never read, which stated that any misrepresentation of ownership to third parties for financial gain constituted immediate breach and personal liability for damages. And clipped to the back an invoice, $71,000 in overdue maintenance and docking fees Preston owed me, unpaid for 4 months, which he'd been quietly assuming I would handle the way I always had. Charles Kensington read through the folder in near silence while 70 guests in cocktail attire stood frozen on the dock, phones already out, some recording, some just staring. Then he looked up at Preston. "You told me your father gifted you this vessel. You told my daughter this was proof of your family's stability, before I wire $15 million into your firm." His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. "And it turns out you don't even own the boat you hosted us on. You couldn't even pay to maintain it." "Charles, I can explain. You had 4 months to pay a maintenance bill, and you couldn't manage that," Charles said. "I'm not investing $15 million into a man who can't manage 71,000. Isabella was already sliding the ring off her finger. I watched her do it, no tears, no scene, just a quiet, final motion, like she was closing a door she'd already decided was the wrong one. "Preston," she said, "I need you to explain something to me right now, and I need it to be true. Did you know she owned this boat the entire time?" My father stepped forward then, trying to salvage what was already gone. "This is a family matter. Meredith, whatever point you're trying to make." "I'm not making a point, Dad." I walked past him, up the dock, toward my captain and my boat and my brother, who was standing there in his tailored tuxedo looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I'm collecting what's mine." Preston's eyes met mine, and for just a second, one single second, I saw something close to fear. "Mayor," he said quietly, "what do you want?" I almost answered him right there. But before I could open my mouth, Charles Kensington's phone buzzed in his hand, and I watched his expression shift from anger into something colder, something far more dangerous for my father than a broken engagement. "Harold," Charles said, turning toward my father, "my attorney just informed me that the Miami Commerce Board received an anonymous asset misrepresentation complaint about you 3 days ago. Filed with documentation." He held up his phone. "Care to explain that too?" My father's face went pale in a way I had never once seen in 26 years. I hadn't filed anything. Which meant someone else already knew exactly what was coming, and had been building their own case against my father long before I ever sent that text. For 3 seconds, nobody on that dock moved. 70 guests, a broken engagement, a folder full of legal documents, and now this, my father standing there while a billionaire he'd spent all night trying to impress read him a complaint he'd never seen coming. "That's absurd," my father said, but his voice cracked on the second word. "There's no complaint. I've built this family's name for 40 years. On my brother's failing firm and my mother's money," I said quietly, but not so quietly that Charles didn't hear it. My father turned to me, and for the first time that night, I saw something other than contempt in his eyes. I saw calculation. He was trying to figure out how much I knew, and how much I'd already given away. "Meredith." A word. "Privately." "No," I said. "I think everyone should hear this part." Daniel stepped in beside me, quiet as always, professional as always. He'd worked for me for 6 years and never once asked why I kept a captain on payroll for a boat I rarely partied on. Now I think he understood exactly why. "Mr. Calloway," Daniel said, "for the record, I did not file any complaint with the Commerce Board. I want that stated clearly, since I imagine the timeline will be scrutinized." "Then who did?" Charles asked, looking between us. That's when I heard her voice from the back of the crowd, calm and unhurried, the way she always sounded even when she was about to detonate something. "I did. Aunt Nora walked through the parting guests in a cream-colored coat, a leather folio tucked under her arm, looking like she'd been waiting for this exact entrance her entire life. My mother's older sister. 71 years old. The only person in this family who'd ever treated me like I mattered before I had money to prove it. Rosalind, my father said, using her middle name the way he always did when he wanted to diminish her, this isn't the place. It's exactly the place, Harold. She stopped a few feet from him, and for a woman barely 5'3", she made him look like he was shrinking. 3 days ago I filed a formal complaint with the Miami Commerce Board regarding asset misrepresentation tied to the estate of my sister, Eleanor Callaway. I have the original court-certified deed transfer showing that half of the Callaway Marina Trust, the property you've been using as collateral to court investors for the last 5 years, was left solely to Meredith upon Eleanor's death. Not to you. Not to Preston. To Meredith. The crowd had gone dead silent except for the soft slap of water against the dock pilings. That trust was restructured, my father said. Legally. It was stolen, Nora said. Legally is generous. You had Eleanor's attorney removed from the estate 6 months after she died and replaced him with your own counsel before Meredith turned 27. I have the correspondence. I have the dates. And now, apparently, thanks to whatever happened out on that water tonight, I have an audience who finally wants to listen. Charles Kensington closed the folder in his hand slowly. Harold, is this true? It's family business dressed up as scandal, my father said, and I watched him try, one last time, to pull the room back onto his side. Every family has disagreements about inheritance. This doesn't make me a criminal. No, Nora said. But falsifying an estate document to redirect trust assets does. And using marina property you don't legally control as loan collateral for Preston's firm, that's a different conversation entirely, isn't it? I watched my father's face when she said it. Not shock. Fear. Real fear, the kind that comes when someone says out loud the thing you thought no one else knew. You used the marina as collateral? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Dad. That marina belongs to me. It was a bridge loan, he said quickly, too quickly. Temporary. To help Preston get his firm off the ground until his Series A closed. I was going to settle it before. Before what? Before I found out. I stepped closer to him. You didn't just take my mother's trust 5 years ago. You've been using property that's legally mine to fund Preston this entire time. While telling me I wasn't smart enough to understand business. Preston, who had been silent through all of this, finally spoke, and his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Dad. Is that true? You told me the capital was clean. You told me it was your money. It doesn't matter where the money came from, Preston, it matters that the firm. It matters to me, Preston said. And for one strange moment, standing there in his ruined tuxedo with his engagement over and his investor walking away, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered him mouthing the word crew at me through the gate 3 hours earlier, and the feeling passed like it had never existed. Charles Kensington had already turned to leave, Isabella beside him, her ring still sitting somewhere in her clutch instead of on her finger. He paused just long enough to say one last thing. Harold, I've done business in this city for 30 years. I've seen men lose fortunes and rebuild them. But I have never seen a man lose his family's trust in a single conversation the way you just did. He looked at me. Ms. Callaway. My apologies for the confusion tonight. It seems you're the only Callaway who actually knows what she owns. He walked off the dock with his daughter. Within the hour, I'd learned the $15 million investment wasn't just paused, it was dead, along with 2 other introductions Charles had promised to make for Preston's firm within Miami's investment circles. My father stood there on the dock, guests slowly peeling away behind him, phones lowering only after they'd gotten every second of it. He looked at me like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in 26 years. You planned this, he said. The gate, the protocol, all of it. You let this happen. No, Dad. I held up my phone, the 6 words still visible on the screen, where I'd sent them hours earlier. I let you build something out of pieces that were never yours. I just told the truth about who they actually belonged to. Nora put a hand on my shoulder, and for a second, standing there on that dock with my mother's yacht behind me, and my mother's sister beside me, I felt closer to Eleanor Calloway than I had since the day she died. But my father wasn't finished. He straightened his jacket, and something shifted in his expression, not defeat, but a colder kind of resolve I recognized immediately, because I'd inherited it from him whether I wanted to or not. You think this is over, he said quietly, just for me. You think one night on a boat undoes 40 years of me building this family's name. I still sit on the Commerce Board, Meredith. I still have relationships you can't touch. By Monday morning, I will have a story ready for every outlet in this city, and it won't be the one you just told. He turned and walked up the dock without looking back, leaving Preston standing alone in the wreckage of his engagement, and leaving me wondering exactly what kind of story a desperate man with 40 years of connections could still tell, and whether the truth would even matter once he told it. By Monday morning, my father did exactly what he promised. He had a story ready. It ran in a mid-tier Miami business blog first, the kind of outlet that exists mostly to be quoted by bigger ones. The headline read, "Family Feud or Fraud. Calloway are accused of sabotaging brother's engagement over inheritance dispute." The article painted me as a bitter, overlooked daughter who'd humiliated her own family in public out of jealousy. It mentioned my unconventional career in salvage engineering like it was a punchline. It didn't mention the deed. It didn't mention the marina. It definitely didn't mention Protocol 0, 6 words, or a folder full of federal documentation. I read it once, standing in my office at 6 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Calm. Because my father had spent 40 years building his reputation on being untouchable, and untouchable men only have one real weapon: control of the narrative. I'd just spent 5 years building something he never once believed in, proof. I called Nora first. Then I called Daniel. Then I called a maritime attorney named Priya Osei, who had drafted my bareboat agreement in the first place, and had been, in her words, waiting for this phone call since the day Preston signed it without reading it. By Wednesday, the Miami Commerce Board's asset misrepresentation investigation into my father had officially opened, based on Nora's complaint, and the documentation she'd been quietly assembling for over a year, bank records showing the marina property used as loan collateral, correspondence showing my mother's original attorney had been forced out under pressure, and sworn statements from 2 of my mother's former financial advisors who'd never believed the restructuring story either. Priya filed a civil suit on my behalf the same week, breach of fiduciary duty regarding the trust, plus a separate claim against Preston for breach of the bareboat agreement, and the unpaid maintenance debt, now sitting at $71,400 with interest. Preston called me 11 times that week. I let most of them go to voicemail. When I finally picked up, his voice sounded like a man standing in the wreckage of a house he'd never actually built himself. "Mayor, please. I didn't know about the marina. I swear to you, I didn't know Dad was using your property as collateral. I just thought he was giving me startup capital." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "If you'd known it was mine, would you have said no?" The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. "I lost Isabella," he said finally. "I lost the investment. My firm's basically finished, Mayor. Nobody in this city will touch me now." "Is that enough? Are we even?" "This was never about being even, Preston." I looked out at the marina from my office window, at the Meridian Grace sitting quiet at her berth, sunlight on her white hull. "I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because I was done being erased so you could look successful. Those aren't the same thing, but I understand why you can't tell the difference. Dad never taught you how." He didn't have a response to that. I don't think he had one for anything anymore. The Commerce Board investigation moved faster than any of us expected, mostly because Charles Kensington, still furious about the $15 million he'd nearly wired to a firm built on borrowed credibility, quietly connected Nora's attorney with two other families who'd apparently had similar restructuring conversations with my father over the years. It turned out I wasn't the first Calloway relative whose assets had been generously managed without full consent. I was just the first one with the resources to fight back. By early spring, the board formally stripped my father of his seat, citing material misrepresentation of asset ownership in connection with third-party investment solicitation. The local business press, the real outlets this time, not the blog that ran his version first, picked up the actual story once the court filings became public record. Headlines shifted fast. Calloway family trust scandal, daughter's legal battle uncovers years of misappropriated assets. My father never publicly apologized. I don't think men like him know how. But 6 months later, the civil suit settled. I recovered full legal control of the marina property, back payment on the collateral misuse, and a formal, court-recorded acknowledgement that the original trust redistribution 7 years earlier had been executed improperly. It wasn't an apology. It was better. It was the truth, finally written down somewhere he couldn't erase it. Preston's firm folded 8 months after the engagement party. Last I heard, he was working under someone else's name at a smaller investment group, learning, I hope, what it feels like to build something without someone else's foundation underneath him. I never got a call from my father after the settlement. Not one. I used to think that would break something in me. It didn't. I think I'd been mourning the father I wished I had long before the wine, before the gate, before the yacht, before any of it. What I felt instead, standing on the dock the day the case closed, was something quieter. Relief, maybe. Or just the absence of a weight I'd been carrying since I was 26 years old and being told I was born to manage what men build. I kept the Meridian Grace. I renamed nothing, she was already named for the only person in my family who'd ever believed in me without conditions. But I did repurpose her. These days she's chartered twice a year for a marine engineering fellowship I fund for young women trying to break into an industry that still, more often than not, assumes they're crew instead of captain. Aunt Nora comes aboard every launch. She always brings the same leather folio, half joking that she keeps it close in case anyone ever needs reminding what happens when they underestimate a Calloway woman. Last month, a first-year fellow asked me why I named the fellowship program after Protocol Zero, instead of my mother's name, the way I'd named the boat. I told her the truth. Because my mother taught me who I was. Protocol Zero taught me what to do when someone else tries to tell me otherwise. She wrote that down. I don't know if she understood it yet. But she will.